Welcome to another exciting episode of Communication Corner with me, your host, Gail Lewis. Tonight we're here at York College in the faculty dining room for a very exciting event. The Macon B. Allen Black Bar Association, in conjunction with the York College Discipline of Political Science, is presenting their 17th annual Justice Kenneth N. Browne Community Law Day Symposium. Tonight's topic, well, access to justice, where you can find free legal help and advice. So let's stay inside the faculty dining room and see where we can get some free legal advice.
You could be working and have a job, and I'll call it like working poor. And it's not, you don't have resources or funds at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, to pay the cost of your defense in a criminal case. Yes, you have a job. Yes, but you don't have, I'll just throw a number out, $15,000 or $20,000 to defend, pay the cost of a defense with a private attorney in a case that goes ahead. So in those situations, how is the eligibility of an individual in that situation handled?
The eligibility then would be determined really by the individual. So if the court flags you and says, hey, you make this much money, and if you know that you still can't afford an attorney, then we would ask that you provide documentation to support that.
Okay. I guess the critical term is afford, and that seems to be somewhat fluid. And I think we'll probably be talking about that as we talk with the other panelists as to eligibility requirements for their various programs and affordability.
I'd just like to add that many of our clients, I know on legal aid, our manager saying that Queens Law Associates, many of our clients are, they are working, but, they don't have that disposable income, or, they support, many family members, and so that's not an unusual circumstance. We have many clients who are in that particular situation.
All right. Let us have next on the program somebody on the civil side. How about we'll start with Professor Goldwebber.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to see you all here tonight and wanted to tell you a little about the programs that we do at the law school. Even though I work with law students under the rules of the court, if they're in a clinical program, their second or third years of law school and are under supervision of faculty and practicing attorneys, they can actually practice law. All of the programs that we have at St. John's, we're really a large legal services office, and we provide free legal services. But because we don't receive state or federal funding for that purpose, really our guidelines are more flexible. If someone comes to see us and it seems they really can't afford an attorney, we'll probably provide representation and don't have some of the same restrictions that we might if we were receiving that funding. One program we have that may be of interest to you, about 2 years ago, we received from the state Office of Court Administration an Access for Justice grant that went to the law school. And it was the first time that law schools were ever given these kinds of grants, and it was because the then Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals in New York State, which is the highest court, Judge Lippman, realized that in civil cases, as Judge Lane said, in criminal cases, you're entitled to an attorney if you can't afford one. That's not true in civil cases. But in the areas of consumer debt, landlord-tenant foreclosure, certain things that can really have a huge impact on people's lives, there was concern that people should be able to have some kind of representation. So what we do with our Access to Justice grant is our students with a lawyer supervisor are in civil court. It's right here in downtown Jamaica on Sutphin Boulevard, 4 mornings a week. And in the civil court, we're there in the consumer debt part. And for those of you who don't know about it, most people who are sued for student loans, for credit card debt, for car loan debt, for all of those kinds of things, you would appear in civil court, most likely, in Queens. Most of the cases, the people bringing the cases usually aren't the original creditor. They're debt buyers. They're these companies that buy a lot of the debt for pennies on the dollar, and then they have attorneys who come to court. So almost all of the people who bring these lawsuits are represented by attorneys. But almost all of the consumers who are sued for some alleged debt, most of them don't have attorneys. So what we do is we are there 4 mornings a week, and in the courtroom they announce our presence, and anyone who's there on a consumer credit case who wants an attorney can come and see us, and we will provide services and representation for the day. It's not perfect because it's not long-term representation, but when we're there, actually, many of the cases do get resolved, and people have the opportunity to make sure if they owe the debt, and if they enter into a settlement, that it's a fair settlement. They'll have representation, and we'll make sure that they have terms that protect them. Also, there are many cases where people said they were never actually served or never got the court papers, and first found out about this when their bank account was restrained or money from their job was actually withheld from them. So then they go to court. So in many of those cases, we're able to actually get many of those dismissed. And then we also see many people who say, I paid off the debt, and they have proof with them, so we can get those dismissed. So, you know, we find that by going there, even providing that limited representation, it usually does have a big impact and allows people to have someone help them navigate through the process. Along with that access to justice grant, we also have an uncontested divorce clinic in the Supreme Court in downtown Jamaica, which is also on Sutphin Boulevard, where there's someone there every day of the week, but our students with a supervisor are there 2 days a week, and will help for free to prepare divorce papers in uncontested divorce cases. So we do both of those programs. And in our clinical program, we have many, many different clinics that represent people, again, for free in many areas. The clinic that I supervise is a consumer justice for the elderly clinic, and we do mostly foreclosure defense. In Queens, there have been many areas where, and especially elderly people in many cases have been targeted through the 2000s with high-cost loans and ended up in foreclosure. Many of our clients have lived in their neighborhoods maybe 30, 40, 50 years, and now find they refinanced at a high rate and couldn't pay it back. So we provide defense in those cases. We also try to get people loan modifications once they're sued to see if we can rework out the loan so they can pay a lesser amount and try to stay in their homes. We also do deed theft cases. There are many situations where clients' homes are literally stolen from them. There are these different, it's called foreclosure rescue scams, where when someone's in foreclosure, these companies pop up and say, we can help you save your home, and a lot of innocent people end up signing documents and don't realize they're actually signing over a deed to their home and not getting anything in return for that. So we provide representation in all of those kinds of cases as well as consumer debt. But we also have clinics that help people file for bankruptcy. We have an economic justice clinic which helps people get food stamps, Medicaid, different public benefits. Our students also, there's a program called Project Fair. When you are getting public benefits, you go to a hearing, an administrative hearing, and again, most of the people are unrepresented. So along with New York Legal Assistance Group, we have a table set up outside of the administrative hearings. Anyone can come over and talk to us. We train the students, and we can try to give advice to people. We also have a few clinics that deal with issues of immigration. One clinic which helps people with getting legal status, And another clinic, our Refugee and Immigrant Rights Clinic, which helps people with asylum cases and actually represents them in hearings in the immigration court. We do have a criminal defense clinic where our students work at Queens Legal Aid and are supervised by legal aid attorneys in providing representation as well. We also have a child advocacy clinic where we represent children who've been abused and neglected. And we also, you've heard about in the news about unaccompanied minors coming to this country who are in desperate need of legal representation. So we take those cases as well. And all of these services are free. We don't do a high volume because we're a law school and we want to make sure that the students are learning how to be good lawyers, and we have to supervise all of the work. But for the clients that we do represent, it is free. And if anyone's interested in our services, because there are intake procedures for people to get them, if anyone just goes on the St. John's website, stjohns.edu, and goes to the law school clinical programs, it lays out how to get in touch with each clinic and how to make an appointment to come in for services.
Just to go back to the point of eligibility for the services, you have no eligibility requirements?
They have to be of lower modest income, but we make those determinations case by case. We don't have a set cutoff. For example, in the Consumer Justice Clinic, we don't expect someone to get a loan against their house or sell their house to get, so even if they have a home with equity in it, that wouldn't be a reason not to represent them. But, most of our clients are very modest means, but we don't have any exact guidelines. It's really on a case-by-case basis.
When you say modest means, is that as a result of a screening? For example, for the gentleman to my left, who I believe works at Queens Legal Services, as an attorney, comes to you and he has a consumer debt problem. I guess he has no money, that's why he's in this financial straits and needs a lawyer. He's being sued to pay back a student loan.
Well, since Maurice is an attorney, we'd probably give him some legal advice, but probably wouldn't, so that he could represent himself. But we do, on our intake sheets, we do ask about income. We also do telephone intake during the school year in the consumer clinic. So people call in all day. They're referred to us from senior centers, social service offices, judges from the courts refer people, and we will screen them. And if it looks like a case we might take, they'll come into the office. If it's a case of something we don't do, we have a huge resource manual and at least try to get them to another organization or give some legal advice. But for people to come to us, we do ask about their income. In the consumer elderly clinic, most of our clients just receive Social Security and maybe a small pension. So there's no question that they'd never be able, to pay for legal services.
Well, one of the reasons I keep mentioning eligibility, because my understanding is that in many, many cases, particularly in consumer debt cases, that the individual may be perceived to be of middle income, but in fact has no financial means of paying for a lawyer. And those are, when we talk about this issue of access to justice, the access to the justice is dependent upon their ability to get legal advice, and typically legal advice or consultation may cost money. And so working class folks, middle income folks may often find themselves in this very difficult situation. We've talked about many programs, legal programs are available to people who are indigent, but there's a large population of people, and I'm sure it makes up a good proportion of this class of people in foreclosures, that they are working class folks or middle income folks, and they find themselves in a very serious legal situation with a foreclosure action.
Yeah. Well, first of all, under our Access to Justice grant, where we go to court, we represent anyone with consumer debt. We don't ask about their finances, so anyone who's there that day who wants an attorney who doesn't have one will provide them the services. And actually, there's one other pilot program in foreclosures that was set up also by the highest court in the state, that there were certain zip codes in Queens, and one of them actually is in South Jamaica, which had very high foreclosure rates. And if you lived in one of those zip codes, the Legal Aid Society would represent you no matter what your income. So there weren't the same income guideline requirements. And actually, for people who were over a certain age, those were referred to our office at St. John's, and we would represent them no matter what their income. Because it is true, even if you're making an income that might be above the poverty levels, that certainly doesn't mean that you have the money to hire an attorney.
So following up on that, we can go to our next speaker, and that will be Martinez, who is a paralegal with Legal Services of Queens County.
Hi, my name is Martinez. I work for Queens Legal Services as a paralegal for the past 15 years, and my job has been to assist disabled individuals obtain Social Security benefits. And that is, first we started just doing the appeal process, going before judges, administrative ALJs, to get the benefits, obtain medical records. But lately we have seen people, because of the computer system that the Social Security Administration have acquired recently, people have not had so much contact with or how to manipulate the computer, how to fill out an application. So now we started doing applications also. So my job has been basically to obtain medical records, present it to the judge, and advocate for them. The majority of our clients is not really the elderly, young individuals who, for some, continue working because they are disabled. They may have had an accident or something that they can just continue working. And basically those are the populations that we see. And also children. We also handle children cases who are born with some type of disability, or they are they have some type of learning disability. The type of cases that we handle at Queens Legal Services is we deal with housing rights, people who have been have tenant issues or evictions and repairs. We do homeowners rights, foreclosure, lending discrimination, fair housing, and homeowner discrimination, consumer rights, student credit, card debt, nursing home and medical debt, family law, domestic violence and civil legal assistance, public benefits, including Medicaid, cash assistance. We also deal with immigration advocacy, naturalization, immigration, applications, asylum and removal. We do education rights, including school discipline, special education, and LGBT, HIV advocacy, general civil legal needs. We also do taxpayer rights, federal justice, unemployment insurance appeals, representation in appeals, and we also have a website where you can contact in case you need our services or you can call us directly. We have the information here if you are interested.
So I'll ask you the same question I've been asking the other panels. What are the eligibility requirements for these free legal services?
Eligibility is determined by our intake officers, but if someone who's on public assistance definitely will qualify for our benefits, or someone who is under 200% guideline, 200% guideline, yes, guideline, will qualify for our benefits.
200%?
200% of the federal poverty level?
So again, I'll use this example like this gentleman to my left who has fallen on very serious financial straits, although an attorney practicing in the state of New York, but nonetheless has no money in the bank, is broke, and is in debt for, how much do you? Is in debt for $400,000. He comes to you and he says, I need some help with my, I've been sued to pay off my student loan.
He's still employed.
He's still employed.
I'm assuming Maurice is living alone. No,
Always.
no children. So it determines how many people is in the home and how much money he makes. So most likely Maurice will not qualify for our services.
So
We
the
will
next
just give him an
question,
advice.
the next question to be answered by the panel, where does he go to get legal help?
He's an attorney.
Well, you know, I'll get the answer question by him. Our next speaker is Maurice Muir. He's a staff attorney at Queens Legal Services.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me, Judge Lane. And thank you for having my colleague do all my work. So she really covered everything for me thoroughly. And I'll admit to you readily, as far as eligibility is concerned, it's really nowadays being done by computer. So what we do now is we plug the information into our information, and it does the computation for us. Now, as part of the intake process, what we do ask questions about their assets. You know, what is your, how much money you have in your checking account, how much money you have in your savings, how much cash you have, whether you own in stocks, bonds, or real property. We need to know that. To a great extent, the services that we provide are dictated by the grants that we get. And every grant is going to have certain type of restrictions and limitations. So some grants say, okay, you can represent people in foreclosure that are homeowners. Other grants will say, the person has to fall within somewhere along the poverty guidelines. So to a certain extent, the services that we provide are dictated by the grants. Now, as my colleague said, we provide a variety of services. We're borough-wide. We have offices in every borough, which includes legal services. The major difference between our office and legal aid is that these guys do criminal law, we don't do any criminal law. Now, and in that respect, you're constitutionally entitled to a lawyer in the criminal aspect, but as far as legal service, civil matters are concerned, there is no entitlement to an attorney. So what you'll find in a lot of these cases that we deal in, there is no right to counsel. Now there's a movement going on, as the professor indicated, by one of the judges that was the chief judge of the Court of Appeals that just retired, to try to assure a constitutional right to all parties litigants, whether it's civil or criminal, but that's still at its infancy. Now, what are the things that we do? And I've been working with legal services for 15 years as well, 15, 16 years. And we provide a variety of services. I'm just going to reiterate a little bit of what my colleague said. We represent clients in consumer matters, primarily dealing with debt collection, credit card issues. We represent clients in family law, primarily dealing with like custody and visitation, child support issues. We do litigation dealing with housing, primarily landlord-tenant law. People are facing eviction or they're trying to compel their landlords to repair the conditions in their apartment, primarily. We also do some, and I primarily do some real estate litigation. As Professor Weber indicated, You know, we got a lot of deed theft cases. I've been dealing with this area for a number of years where homeowners' deeds have been stolen from them and they've been victimized. We also represent clients that are facing foreclosure. And in that respect, we go deeper. Not only do we do the loan modifications, we also represent them through the entire foreclosure process, and we do litigation. We do what we call affirmative litigation, where we go after investors, real estate brokers, attorneys, as far as real estate fraud is concerned. We also do immigration. We got a dynamic immigration unit that helps people become citizens and do a bunch of other citizen-related issues. Now, one of the things that you got to remember, that you guys in particular got to remember, what we are doing is public interest law, which means that we are representing the public, versus private sector law, where you have, you know, attorney that's representing the private sector or a corporation. Now, I've been practicing law for over 20 years, and I can tell you it's a dynamic profession. I highly recommend that you pursue it if you have any endeavors on doing so. And one of the reasons why I recommend it is because it's constantly challenging and you're always learning. I have to go back to my office this evening to finish up our project report tomorrow. So, you know, you definitely should pursue it and have Judge Leach and Judge Lane and all these distinguished jurors here that I'm sure you can call upon for some guidance and support to accomplish that goal. Now, the other thing that you got to remember, in our office, we represent clients in different forums. Okay, so you'll find that not only are we at the administrative level, whether it's unemployment compensation, we also represent clients in civil forum, we represent clients in Supreme Court. Sometimes I run into Judge Lane and he wants to run me out of town. And we represent clients in federal court. So as an attorney, you know, again, you're going to be in different forums. And depending on the nature of the area of practice will determine where you're going to be litigating the case. And one of the things in the civil matter, I think that I want to say in closing is, a majority of the people that are in civil court are not represented by attorneys. And one of the things you got to remember is that if you don't know what your rights are, there's a possibility that you will be victimized, because the courts do not have an obligation to tell you what your rights are. They sit on the bench as a neutral party. So you can't rely on the court to say, hey, Judge Lane, what are my rights? You might be victimized, or Judge Lease, you know, what are my rights? It doesn't work that way. So even whether or not you are eligible for the services, you always should try to seek some type of legal advice or some type of legal representation, so at least know what your rights are and know where to go. Now, one of the things that we do at Legal Services, if in fact you're not eligible for our services, we would recommend you to Queens County Bar Association. And then they have something which you call a pro bono unit, where they'll try to get you a free lawyer to represent you in your area or in your area that you're trying to address. That's right.
Okay, let me ask this question. I read somewhere, and I have this statistic, Queens County foreclosure litigation has defaults by homeowners as high as 50% in the residential foreclosure. And in what respect to residential foreclosure, there's an extremely high percentage of pro se meaning that the litigant is representing themselves, has the highest percentage of pro se defendants than any other litigation category. So the question is, why are so many people, homeowners, who are about to lose their home in a foreclosure action, why are they in default? So explain default. I'll have, who wants to do that?
You want to go first with that?
Sure. I think, well, in a lot of our cases, I mean, it's not happening anymore, and since the financial crash in 2008, but, you know, all through the 2000s, there was a big rise in the concept of subprime lending, where people who maybe had less than perfect credit were getting loans. Now, that in and of itself is a good thing, that, you know, other people should be able to participate and also be able to get a mortgage so that they can buy a home even if they don't have perfect credit. But what happened a lot of different companies arose, and you probably, well, you may have heard of some of the names Countrywide. Some of them are out of business now. Many of them are out of business now. AmeriQuest, all of these finance companies that were making loans with very high interest rates, and were making loans to people where maybe the rates were too high for the people to pay back. Or they might have something called an adjustable rate mortgage, where it would say your interest will only be 2% or 1%. But what people didn't realize or understand is that might be for 6 months. And then after that, it might go up to 10, 12%. So what was happening is so many people couldn't afford, they entered into these loans, and a lot of people, I think, who were financially unsophisticated, they were told something different. We at least have found in the cases we take, many times there's fraud involved in what's told to people, so they ended up getting into these situations. I know with my clients who are elderly, you know, the vast majority of my clients worked their whole lives, and now they're retired. Many of them, even though they worked at jobs their whole lives, if they have a pension, it's very small, so they're living on Social Security. And if you own a home and you're taking in $1,000, $1,200 a month, I mean, even as students, you know it's really hard to make it, to pay utilities, phone, transportation, food, clothing, and all of that for such a small amount. So many of my clients were in a situation where they needed home improvements done, or they had high medical bills, or some emergency came up. So they would refinance their home, and then it turned out the payments became unaffordable. And they didn't really realize that the payments were going to be that high. And another reason why in these situations, I think a lot of elderly people in particular were really targeted is because a lot of times they had a lot of equity in their home because they paid off their mortgages, or most of them. So these companies could come in and they could take a lot of the equity out of the home by giving them, you know, by giving them a big mortgage with a high interest rate. And by doing this, these mortgage brokers would make more money for themselves. And, you know, now, I mean, it's very complicated, but all of that was really involved in the whole financial crisis that came about in 2008. And now those practices have stopped, and there are a lot of different things in place. But I know when I started doing this work, I found it really interesting when I realized under the law that mortgage brokers and banks had no obligation to make sure a loan they were giving to a customer was affordable or suitable for them. I found that really surprising, but under the law, they didn't have to do that. Since that time, there's a new federal agency called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and that's federal, but it has these rules that apply to banking and finance. And there are, I mean, I think we have a ways to go, but there are a lot more protections in place now than were in place prior to 2008. You know, a mortgage is you borrow money from a lending institution. You still own your home, but every month you have to make payments. And if you stop making the payments, the lender can go to court to foreclose or try to take back the home if you don't pay. But the reason foreclosure rates, I mean, my understanding, and from working with the legal services community and my clients, I think there are several reasons. First, I think many people were not really served with the legal papers. In order to start a lawsuit, the lending institution has to serve you, meaning bring to you personally, or there are certain other rules, and give you the court papers to start the case. And then you have a certain number of days to answer that case. But what was happening is they were swearing, the process servers, that they had served people, but in many, many cases, they really hadn't served them. They found the problem of process servers, there's a term that's used a lot in New York, sewer service, that the process servers would really, it's kind of equating to just throw the, you know, the legal papers down the sewer and not really serve them, but then not tell the truth in their sworn statements and say they had. So many times the clients didn't know about it. Other times people didn't know what to do when they got these papers or didn't know what it meant. because they're not written necessarily in such friendly terms that a layperson can really understand them or know what to do. Other times, people might have thought, well, gee, I couldn't pay, so I guess there's nothing I can do about it. You know, I think there are a lot of reasons. And also because we don't have enough free legal services available to people in civil cases. So I think that's the reason why there were so many defaults. Another thing that's been happening, the lender might say to them, well, gee, if you're working out a loan modification, I know I've had several people come in who told us that the lending institution said, well, then you don't have to worry about the lawsuit. But then at the same time, the lawsuit is proceeding and there's a default against them. And a default means you haven't shown up, so they just get a judgment against you without your... You can reopen in court a default, but it's not so easy, and you have to show that you have a good reason for the default, and also that you have good defense, a meritorious defense in the case. And you usually need a lawyer to try to get it reopened, because it's not so easy to do that on your own. So there really are a lot of obstacles. And that's why all of these different things, why you're not entitled to an attorney in a civil case, there's been a lot of action and movement. In New York City now, the city council in eviction cases, I believe, is making available that people in eviction cases, if they're losing their housing, even though it's civil, would have a right to a lawyer. So there's a big movement afoot to try to provide lawyers in civil cases. But there's a funding issue of having enough money to be able to, you know, have attorneys to be able to do it.
Particularly in the foreclosure situation, a lot of people from the 2008 situation found themselves in what's known as a hardship, meaning that one or more of the persons were laid off because, you know, our city, 90% of the people work in some type of financial services or banking or service industry. And when the economy takes a big downturn, one or more people lose their job. And that creates a situation where one household earner is not able to pay the mortgage. That was happening with the recession in a large number of cases. Then the other thing that was happening is that when the economy started to recover and people were getting their jobs back, they still had not paid their mortgage for 1 or 2 years, and the banks had not done anything other than serve the papers to preserve their rights, and time was just running and running and running, and these balances were building up so much that people were overwhelmed with the feeling, and so they weren't coming to court. They did, and realistically, they were losing hope. They did not see a way out, and it was really only through all the attorney generals in the state, in the nation, getting together and going after these banks for creating that situation, that we then had them. We had the attorney generals getting money, particularly here in New York State, between the now governor and Schneiderman, the now attorney general, going after those banks, getting that pool of money, and creating grants that went to schools like St. John's, and creating these neighborhood housing programs that when people found themselves in that situation, they then were able to get somebody to at least talk to resume having hope on being able to keep their home. Then New York State took it the next step and made that, codified that as law, creating the foreclosure conference part, where the main issue is to retain the home to people in New York. So you had all these things coming together at one time, the banks not moving in a forthright manner to even foreclose the way they were supposed to, letting these balances get ridiculously high that people owed, and then people still trying to get out of it. Now, Has the situation gotten better? Yes. You now have to, the banks can't even start a foreclosure action unless they give you a 90-day notice that you are 90 days behind. And then they have to make it come in a different color. It can't be the same thing as your regular mail. So that it's trying to get people who are in this situation, who are depressed, behind on their mortgage, been through a hardship, to get to places where they can get help.
Judge Lane, I think that you hit it on the nose. It all sort of boils down to what they call securitization. I think this is where everything sort of went wild. The banks that you're talking about is not really banks, they're investors. The ones that own your mortgages are investors. So, and they're basically transferring these monies, you know, at the blink of the eye. So it's not like you had your traditional lending institution that would be stuck with your mortgage for 30 years. You understand? The financial transactions that are dealing with now today is a totally different dynamic. The mortgages are converted into bonds, okay? And it's the investors that own the mortgage, called mortgage-backed securities. And so the underwriting standards that a bank would traditionally employ to determine your eligibility for a mortgage, all that went by the wayside because it wasn't the banks that were going to be holding your mortgages for 30 years. And so you had all these investors from Wall Street buying these bonds, and they flooded these communities, minority and black communities, with funds that they simply could not afford. It's what we call reverse redlining. They targeted these areas, as the professor indicated, with people that had equity. They had equity, they had no money, but they had equity. And so they would give these homeowners monies, financing that they simply could not afford. Now the problem is, yes, the government tried to step in and give them avenues for them to do loan modifications, but the problem is, even with the loan modifications, the property was still underwater. So in essence, what you had was a redefault. So they initially defaulted on the mortgage, you give them a loan modification, and then there's a 68% redefault on those mortgages. And the banks and lending institutions or investors that own the mortgages were not willing to do what we call a principal reduction. Okay, so, I mean, if they was gonna absorb some of this monies and then let the homeowner really give them a really affordable mortgage, that would have been a different story, but the lending institutions are not doing principal reductions. So we still find ourselves in this predicament. So what do you got? You have basically, you know, you have basically a wealth drain on the next generation. When, you know, Senator Schumer had did a report a number of years ago, and he made a comparison between the people that lived in Flushing and Glendale versus the people that live in, the black folk that live in Laurelton and Gainborough Heights. And the study showed that the people, even though they were all professionals and had the same credit scores, the people in the black communities were paying more for their mortgage, 4% more. Okay, so what does that ultimately end up meaning? That means that the people in Canberra Heights, Laurelton, they're going to be paying their mortgage much longer. And when they die, they're going to be giving their children less of an inheritance. And so what ultimately ends up happening is you maintain a stratification. You know, the people in the minority neighborhoods are not growing socially and economically at the same rate as the people in the you know, predominantly white neighborhoods. And the senator did a video, a conference on this area, Senator from Massachusetts, and it's amazing. I mean, it's systemic discrimination. Let's call it for what it is.
Okay, so at this point, we'll throw it open to any questions from the audience. Anybody?
Of course, the homeowners were putting less than 20% down, often caused them to have to pay private mortgage insurance. Is that correct? Many instances. So what happens to the insurance that all these lenders were insured by in relationship to issues of not making, as Maurice pointed out, principal reduction, because they're not, though the houses are underwater and though these banks lend a whole bunch of money, much of the mortgage was insured. So therefore, they're not even, when they short sell the property, they still make, they're not losing money. So my question is to letting you panelists know, what happens to this mortgage insurance? What role is that playing in the lack of modifications being given or certain principles?
Well, you see, originally, when most of these subprime mortgages were made, they were made usually not by the banks, but by these financial companies. But they didn't actually fund the mortgages in almost every, or I think in every one of these cases, they were assigned. So Countrywide would make a mortgage, okay, and they'd have a high interest rate. They would get money from Bank of America or Wells Fargo or HSBC for making the loan, but they wouldn't actually fund it. So the higher the amount and the higher interest rate, the more money they would make. So they didn't really care if the person could pay or not. Then what all the banks did to securitize these loans, they sold them. They bundled them into packages and they sold them to investors. And part of the whole scandal is that the banks knew that they were selling to their investors paper that wasn't good, but they got paid back because they had insurance on it, and the investors who ended up owning these mortgages were left holding the bag. And that's what happened and what led to the whole collapse. But the banks themselves, the two initial parties, they got rid of them really quickly. So they made their money and they left. And then they packaged them and sold them to investors, and investors didn't realize that what they were getting wasn't really worth a lot.
I don't know if I saw this in a movie. Was this the
It
chart?
was, yeah, that was the movie, and it's the
Yeah.
true story about what happened. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good movie.
Yeah. I have to watch it a few times because I
To
didn't
really
quite
get
understand it
everything, it's
yet.
complicated.
Yeah. Well, if we have no more questions, I want to thank all of our panelists. It was very interesting, very informative, and I thank you again for taking time from your busy schedules to participate in this program. And thank you.
I think there's a question.
You were stating that you give
Legal representation.
Have legal
Well,
representation
in
some
civil
cases.
court on consumer debt issues, they've just reorganized that, and they're only hearing consumer debt cases in the mornings, Monday through Thursday, and we have an attorney and supervising law students, and if someone is in that consumer debt part, we do provide free legal services for the day, on the day people come to court, anyone who wants free assistance.
I have another question. If I may. And Professor, when the clients come to get the free legal advice and you're in court representing them, what happens if the case is adjourned and they have to come?
We take, myself and the other attorney who supervises our clinic, we go with our students one day a week as well. So when we're there, if it's someone who meets our guidelines and they still need help, we may actually take those cases and continue to represent them. But the other thing that's available, there's a program called CLARO, which is Civil Legal Assistance Resource Office. It's also in the civil court, and it operates every Friday. You can just walk in from 1:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon, and anyone with a consumer debt case, they'll help you draft an answer, motions, discovery. They'll help you do all of that. They're not actually representing you. So let's say we're in court with someone and they need to take another step. We'll give them all the information and tell them to take it and go to CLARO, and they'll assist them with the next step. It's not a perfect system, but it's a lot better than it used to be. And actually, we at St. John's Law School, we were involved in setting up the one in Queens, and our law students are there with volunteer attorneys every Friday, St. John's Law students. And anyone can come in, and that's free. And it's not that we just give you forms, like lawyers will help you fill them out and explain to you everything that's going on. So between the two, it kind of covers things, but it's not the same as having a lawyer who's with you from day one.
So what I'm hearing, in order to kind of be able to reach as many people as possible to provide legal services, you provide assistance or consultation, although that individual may not have an actual lawyer representing them, but they're getting advice.
When we're in civil court, we actually, it's called limited scope representation, which is a new thing in New York, where we can, if we're from a legal services office, we can actually, as long as it's clear and the client agrees to it, we can be their lawyer for the day. So we actually file a limited notice of appearance, and we're their attorney of record for the day we're in court with them. When we go, I'd say at least half our cases we end up resolving that day in court. Just by having a lawyer there and knowing what's going on, we get a lot of them dismissed because they've been wrong, they've wrongfully had defaults against them. And others, if the person really owes the money, will work out what we think, try to reduce the payment and work out a fair settlement and help them work out a written agreement. In Claro, that other program, that's not representation, it's legal advice.
Any more questions? All right, thank you. How about a hand for the panel?
Well, the clinic that I run is a consumer frauds clinic. So people come to us because they've been sued in foreclosure, because they've been scammed by a home improvement contractor, because they've been sued for consumer debt, which they may or may not owe, and they need legal assistance. And for many of our clients, it's the first time they've ever been involved in the legal system and really are seeking someone to help them. Well, if they're interested in our program, the Consumer Justice for the Elderly Clinic, and we do telephone intake during the school year, 718-990-6689. But
I think it was great. It's a part of a continuing collaboration between York College and the Macon Island Black Bar Association in tribute to Ken Browne Law Day. So it's an honor and a privilege for us to be here this is our 17th year that we've been putting on this program. Many of those years here at York College. The fact that oftentimes people in minority communities are taken advantage of in lending institutions, in higher rates of mortgages, higher rates of consumer credit cards, so all these things. So most of it is based on the financial basis, and the fact that to fight these situations, most people don't have the money, and so therefore they end up not going to court, and they default, or they go to court and they're not properly represented. So in either case, they lose. And so it just exasperates itself, and its last financial conditions since 2008 has just exasperated that situation for so many of our members of our community.
Oh, York plays a pivotal role in this community. I mean, it's the hub of economic development in Southeast Queens and South Jamaica in particular. So when York does events like this, Gail, it's because York believes that it's important to invite the community in, because the community was a big part of the reason why York is actually based here in South Jamaica, obviously. Other people would have liked to have seen it based over in Bayside on Queens College campus, but the community fought for York College to be based here so that we would have a hub of educational activity right in the heart of Southeast Queens. So it's important for York to give back and to support events like this that Macon B. Allen does every year. And this is the 17th year we've been doing this with the Macon B. Allen Black Bar Association. It's a wonderful event. We invite the community in, we invite our students. Our students get internships. I mean, you can't beat it. It's a great partnership.
This has been another exciting episode of Communication Corner. I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation by the Macon B. Allen Black Bar Association and the York College Discipline of Political Science as they presented the 17th Annual Justice Kenneth N. Browne Community Law Day Symposium. Tonight's presentation was about access to justice, where you can find free legal help and advice. For more information about anything you've seen on TV here tonight, you can always hit me up on my website, www.gale-lewis.com. And for everybody here at Communication Corner, thanks so much for watching. I'm Gail Lewis, and we'll see you again real soon. Good night, everybody.